Hi, I'm Jason Martin, Environmental Coordinator for the City of Greenbelt, and this is a presentation that I gave at workshops for in-home vermicomposting last year, but now you don't have to take time out of your Saturday for it. You can view it at home. So, what is vermicomposting? Vermicomposting is essentially using the power of the earthworm to turn organic matter, i.e. food scraps from your kitchen, into nutrient-rich, great black gold called compost. So this will be a combination of decayed organic matter and worm castings. And worm castings is essentially a fancy term for worm droppings, which are packed full of nutrients and your plants are going to love them. Now this can be done on a small scale or it can be done on a large scale. This is a large scale. There are industrial size operations that sell the worm castings at your local garden supply store. This is the 2-bin system that you have at home that you got from me. It's a small in-home system that will not generate as much castings as an industrial system, obviously, but is perfectly fine for your indoor potted plants or a small vegetable garden. So what are earthworms? Well, I think everyone's pretty much familiar with earthworms. They're those little squiggly things that you find on the road and sidewalks after it rains. And they live in the soil, and they also live in leaf litter. We'll talk about later on about different species and types of earthworms that occupy different areas of the soil column and then also different areas of the leaf litter in the forest. They're found all over the world with the exception of Antarctica for obvious reasons. They would freeze. Extreme environments like deserts and things like that, you're generally not going to find your earthworms because they don't like it too wet, they don't like it too dry, they don't like it too cold, they don't like it too hot. They are arguably one of the most important soil organisms in the world. I did my graduate research on termites, so I'm going to argue that termites are one of the most important soil organisms in the world, but nobody wants a termite farm in their house. Also, worms, I have to say, work a little bit quicker. So what do worms do? They eat organic material, i.e. dead stuff, dead plant material. And when they do this and they move in the soil column and through the leaf litter, they're spreading these nutrients all around the environment, horizontally and vertically. Their tunnels help to aerate the soil, and this also provides drainage for soils, which is great for tree and other plant roots. They act like mini composters, so as they're eating this organic material, they're digesting it and then producing the castings, which are nutrient-packed, essentially little bits of compost they leave behind. And they also act as prey for other organisms. So this is a diagram of a worm. They have a mouth, an esophagus, a crop, and a gizzard, which is kind of similar to our stomach, which grinds those large food particles into smaller ones, which then the nutrients are absorbed in the intestines, and then the castings come out the backside on the anus. Earthworms occupy different areas of the leaf litter and soil ecosystems. So some go up and down the soil column. Some can go down as deep as a meter underground. Some move horizontally in the soil column. Some go very deep, some go very shallow, and some don't go in the soil at all and just simply exist in the leaf litter. If you've ever looked in your yard at a bare patch of soil and saw a little mound like this is worm castings. So the worms that burrow in the soil will usually push their worm castings to the surface. But instead of going out in your yard and gathering up these worm castings by hand, you can just produce them in your home with your new in-home vermicomposting kit. Everybody saves time, money, and energy. And of course they do serve as prey. A lot of mammals that exist underground, your moles and your voles, of course birds, they all love to eat worms. So the idea is to use worms to take your food scraps and turn them into compost. So how are we going to do this? Well, first off, you're going to have to get your hands on some red wigglers. This is the commercial term for the species of worm that is right there in italics. I'm not going to try to pronounce it because I do not speak Latin. But they like to be kept between 55 and 80 degrees, but the optimal temperature for these guys is 65 to 70 degrees. So they're kind of like Goldilocks. They don't like it too hot, they don't like it too cold. Room temperature is perfect, so these guys are great for use in home. You have to keep your bedding moist but not too wet. Should feel like a well-wrung sponge. So when you squeeze your bedding, no water should be dripping out, but your hand should be wet. And it's important not to overfeed them. If you go and check on them and there's still food present, don't feed them. But if you look and almost all the food is gone or all the food is gone, it's time to feed them. Over time, you'll get on a schedule of how much they're eating, depending on how many worms exist in your in-home vermicomposting kit. So this species of worm, the red wigglers, they're Epigiuk, which means they like to exist in the leaf litter, which is why the bedding is shredded newspaper and you get it nice and fluffy, because that's where they like to exist. They don't like to go down in the soil. They like to exist in the leaf litter, so they're going to be nice and happy in there. They do well in large groups. The size vermicomposting kit that we give away can house about 5 pounds of worms, which is about 5,000 individual worms. So these guys do well in large groups. They're native to Europe, but they've been introduced globally, so if you want to take some of these worms and put them in your garden, it's perfectly fine. You're not going to hurt anything. And their lifespan is about 1 to 2 years. They are hermaphroditic, just like all other worms, but you still need 2 worms to mate, so they cannot reproduce by themselves. But both worms have male and female reproductive organs, which means both worms will mate with each other, and then they will both lay viable eggs. So one worm can produce about 5 eggs a week. These eggs can take up to 45 days to mature. A newborn worm takes about 10 weeks to grow to maturity. And so that means if you do all this math, about 1 pound of worms can produce about 1 pound of worms, can produce about 10 pounds of worms in 5 months. This is optimal conditions. Your results may vary. And your worms, once they become overcrowded and there's enough worms in your in-home vermicomposting kit, they'll stop breeding, so there's no need to cull the worms. You don't have to monitor how many are in there and get rid of them as they become more populated. You can just let them do their thing and they'll stop breeding once they become crowded enough. You do not want to feed them meat, dairy, fat, oil, hot pepper, salty foods, garlic, onion, or anything citrus. You do want to feed them leafy greens, potatoes, carrots, apples, banana peels, and things like that. So think bland. Bland foods they like. Your really strong, oily, fat, hot, spicy, citrusy, acidic stuff they don't like, with the exception of coffee grounds. They will accept coffee grounds. It's best if you break the food into small bits so that it's easier for them to feed. Don't feed them, like I said, if the food is still visible. And these worms can eat about half their body weight in food a day under optimal conditions. Again, your results will vary depending on moisture and temperature and different things like that. Some tips is to keep a light on the kit for the first few days, preferably with the top open. This will keep the worms down in their bedding and get them acclimated to their new home. Place a sheet of newspaper over the bedding and keep it moist with a spray bottle. Place food under the sheet of newspaper. Of course, keep the whole thing moist with a spray bottle. And start with a small amount of food and then build the food up from there as you get used to how much they're eating. And of course, they'll eat more as they breed and produce more worms. And if you want, when you separate the worms from the castings, you can try to save the eggs. But again, they're going to mate and lay more eggs, so you don't have to pick out every single egg if you don't want to. And these are what the eggs look like. They look like tiny little pearls, and they are large enough to see with the naked eye. So separating the worms and the castings, there's several methods. There are the methods that are more labor intensive. The method I will recommend with this 2-bin system is less labor intensive but takes a little more time. So you can shove all of the compost and worm castings to one side, put fresh bedding on the other side, and some food, and wait for the worms to migrate. You can take small clumps on a tarp or piece of plastic, shine a light on them. The worms will go into those small clumps, and you can take them out by hand individually. You can, of course, make a screen where you just screen out the compost and the worms remain on top of the screen. Or you can use the 2-bin method, which means that once the 1 bin gets all of the newspaper and the food is all broken down and it looks like worms are essentially in just dirt, you take the other bin, stick it on top, put fresh bedding, fresh food in there, and the worms will migrate up through the holes in the bottom. This can take several weeks though, so it is time consuming. So once you separate the worms from the castings, how do you use the castings? The castings can be used as a soil amendment. There's a lot of water retention in this organic material and a lot of great nutrients. They're full of great beneficial nutrients and bacteria that are great for plants. It's slow release, so that you will not burn your plants, so there's no fear of overdoing it. You can put quite a bit out in your garden and everything will be fine. And the castings also help to absorb water, so if you have very clay, hard pan type soil somewhere in your yard, you can incorporate this and it's going to help with the water absorption and moisture retention of that soil. Or you can just simply sprinkle them around the base of plants, mix lightly on the top of your soil and potted plant or somewhere in your flower or vegetable garden, and water in, and you're good to go. That is a very quick version of this presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at jmartin, that's JMARTIN, at greenbeltmd.gov. I thank you for your time, and I hope you the best of luck with your new kit.